Okay, so I would like to present an analysis of the first chapter of the novel City of Glass, written by Paul Auster. And here is the man. Um, the novel City of Glass is written by Paul Auster as a part of his New York trilogy. Um, in my analysis, oh, I would like to first focus on the main character, and the main character's name is Daniel Quinn. Quinn, he is 35 years old. His wife and son died in a car accident, and he's a writer of mystery novels. He lives alone in a small New York apartment and enjoys reading and walking and painting and watching movies and does all of these things alone. He's an author but does not publish his works under his own name, which would mean that he made up another man's name, who's William Wilson. He made up a man named William Wilson. Sorry. Bad phrasing. Okay. So up next in my analysis, I would like to include the importance of the city, New York, as well as Quinn's walk around the city, because New York City is actually a great example of Quinn's personality. Because, so everyone knows New York City is a very big city, and it has a huge population. Therefore, you can easily feel either lost or feel alone when walking around in the city, which is why I chose the quote on page 11, and I'm citing this. New York was an inexhaustible space, a labyrinth of endless steps, and no matter how far he walked, no matter how well he came to know his neighborhoods and streets, it always left him with the feeling of being lost. Lost not only in the city, but within himself as well. Because of the city's significance, and the walks that Quinn takes, they all play a huge role in showing his personality, which is why I chose this quote on page 12, and I'm citing again. Each time he took a walk, he felt as though he was leaving himself behind, and by giving himself up to the movement of the streets, by reducing himself to a seeing eye, he was able to escape the obligation to think, and this, more than anything else, brought him a measure of peace, a salutary emptiness within. New York was a nowhere he had built around himself. So, the fact that New York was the nowhere that he had built around himself, in other words, says that he is non-existent, or he is, but he feels non-existent. So one would say that when, for example, when Quinn leaves himself behind in order to become a writer, Wilson, whose name he uses to publish his works, he thereby publishes his work under a pseudonym, Wilson. The reason why he leaves himself behind, the reason why he makes up this person Wilson, might be because he feels responsible for being alive when his wife and son died, previous to this part of the story. Therefore, the quote, "He no longer wished to be dead," which is right there on page 13, might describe how he, after the accident, wanted to die, but now that he kind of left himself, he doesn't need it anymore. He doesn't need to wish to be dead, because he, to some extent, is already nowhere and non-existent. Therefore, one could argue that Quinn lives a posthumous life because he feels like he doesn't exist, and therefore he kind of lives past the end of his life, if that makes sense. In Quinn's mystery novels, he tells the story of the detective Max Burks, the beautiful man over here, who encounters different situations very different from Quinn himself, because Quinn is very lonely and shy and stays in his apartment all the time. Therefore, further in my analysis, I want to focus on Quinn's relationships because they're very significant for the story as well. First of all, Quinn isolates himself from other humans. He's over there in the apartment. He does not have contact to anyone, not even like physical contact with his agent, who's responsible for sharing his work with the publisher and receiving and forwarding his paychecks, which is very important because that's why he's writing, which is why I chose the quote, "He had an agent, but they had never met." Their contacts were confined to the email on page 12 and 13. Furthermore, Quinn lost all his friends right down here. And the fact was that he no longer had any friends on page 13. Therefore, Quinn is left to himself, William Wilson, and his character Max Work, who he had become very close to. That was citing as well. These three different personalities creates the triad of selves, which in the book is described as like this. Wilson, over here, served as a kind of ventriloquist. Quinn himself was the dummy, and Work was the animated voice that gave purpose to the enterprise. This is described on page 14. In a way, Quinn justifies the fact that he has three personalities by saying that one wouldn't survive without the other, meaning that they're a whole to some extent. Since, for example, Quinn wouldn't survive without Wilson because Wilson is actually the one receiving the money on paper. Therefore, neither Quinn nor Wilson would receive any money, or therefore Quinn wouldn't survive without Wilson. And since he's the one, and neither Quinn nor Max would neither Quinn nor Wilson would receive any money if it wasn't for Work, because he's the main character of Wilson's mystery novels. So in that way, they're all connected to some extent. In the story, suddenly Auster is introducing a fourth person, who is named Paul Auster. So when the phone rings for the third time, the woman speaking is looking for a man named Paul Auster, who we know as readers is the actual author of City of Glass. In the story, Paul Auster is a detective, just like Max Work in the story, which is actually metafiction, because they're mentioning a story within the story. Just a fun fact there. So, when the woman asks for Paul Auster, Quinn decides to pretend he is Paul Auster by saying, in the quote in the bubble, speaking, he said, "This is Auster speaking," on page 18. Thereby he pretends to be the fourth person, just like he pretends to be Wilson, over there, and Work. Another way of connecting Quinn and Auster would be to compare Quinn and Work's relationship, because Quinn has been working so much with the character Work in his mystery novels that he almost has become him. That's the thing with the triad of self. Again, back. So one would be able to argue that Auster might have worked with the character Quinn so much in his trilogy, New York trilogy, that that Auster has started to become more like Quinn in real life, just like Quinn and Work in the story. That's a very interesting point of view, at least. The novel also uses postmodern features, such as intertextuality, when the phone rings several times, creating the tension that can be very similar to Peter and the Wolf. Scream, because there's the build-up and the tension, the repeating actions. Furthermore, the story is a detective story because it has a surprising element when Auster and the murderer suddenly becomes a part of the novel. There's a potential victim which is the woman calling and asking for Paul Auster. Um, there's also the whole solving a murder when Quinn begins to solve the murder, or at least the problem. And there are two detectives, or it can be seen as two detectives with Quinn and Work. The story is written in third-person omniscient narrator, who includes the readers in the story by using we and us when speaking to the readers, so that the readers feel like they're part of the story or they're referred to, which is very nice as well. So that was actually all I had for City of Glass. It's a great novel, great first chapter of a novel. So thank you. Perfect.